We are going to slide this axle out of this two-person coupe so we can add the motor hardware to the axle and then add the motor. The first thing we're going to do is take this derailleur, or this caliper, loose. You can leave the cable attached. This is on the passenger side. If you're looking at the front of the bike, it would be the left side. And what we're going to do, we're leaving the cable attached right here, still attached to the arm at the bottom. We're going to take out this screw and this screw, and then we'll let the caliper dangle with the brake cable still attached to it, so you don't have to go back and use a fourth hand to reattach the brake cable line. Again, this is on the passenger side. If you're on in a one-seater or a Go Boy series, if you're looking at the front of the bike, it would be the left-hand side. Just take these and set them aside, because you will need them to reattach it when we're through. And I'll pop this out, and then we'll just let that caliper dangle. So it's back here, and it'll just sit there and dangle. I'm going to move this one. Now the caliper is loosened and taken off, and it will dangle with the brakes. You're going to brake cable. You will do that on both sides. Just let it take the two bolts out that go into it. Leave these two bolts attached. This is the black bracket that the brake sits on. I'll show you from the outside, you can see it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take off this passenger side wheel. You can leave the driver's side wheel on. The reason we do that, you don't have to take that one off. It's easier to pull the axle out if you leave the driver's side wheel on and attached. So now what we're going to do is we'll take off this passenger side wheel. Okay, now what we're going to do is take off this passenger side wheel. Now we're going to take this passenger side wheel off. You can do that by holding a collar with a crescent wrench or a pair of channel locks, and then use a crescent wrench to take the 3/4 nylon nut off of the end. And this would be the same way if you have a disc brake on this side, or you just have the single brake with the brake on the other side. Same thing. You're going to just loosen the nut, take off the 4 washers and set them aside. And then we're going to slide this wheel off. So now that the wheel is gone, if you have dual brakes, and you won't have these collars that are right here. If you only have the single brake, then you'll have 3 collars and a washer. And what we're going to do is loosen these up. And then we'll slide them off. It may be a little tight. You may have to take a wrench, your crescent wrench, and pull them off a little bit, or take a hammer and a flathead screwdriver and knock the end of the bearing right here so it'll slide off. And then we'll go back with a file and file down every place that the set screw, which is this right here, has left a mark on the axle. And we're going to do the same thing with the rest of our collars and our freewheels. The freewheels have 2 set screws in them. One on top, one on the bottom, one in where the keyway is for the key, and then one on the opposite side right here. So we'll loosen those. On a one-seater, you're only going to have 1 set of these, or a Go Boy series. Except the X2, you'll have just 1. On 2 and 4-seaters, you will have 2 clusters in the back. One, we're still on the passenger side, back passenger side, and then over to the other side, which is your driver's side, and then there is your brake for the driver's side wheel. So we're going to loosen all collars and the 2 freewheels, clusters, or smaller bikes, 1 cluster. So we'll loosen everything up so we can slide that axle and get the motor components on. Alright, now I've got all the collars loosened and moved so they can slide back and forth on the axle. I'm still over on the passenger side, the left side. I've loosened the set screws on my freewheel, the cluster freewheel, and you can see the key right here. I would remove the keys and just set them aside until you're going back to put it together. And I'll show the other side. And I still have the brake and the wheel on the driver's side. That way I can pull it all the way through, and when I put it back together, it will stop at that wheel. The keys are tight in the keyway, so you may have to take a pair of pliers, or I'm using just a pair of channel locks to just pull it out, and it pulls out just like that. And just set it aside, and that way I can start moving. Now this will allow me to move, and I'll start moving the axle out. If you see, the axle's moving, the wheel's coming out. And I come over to this wheel, which is on the driver's side, and I'm pulling the axle out. That way, you only have to take off so many components. All you're going to have to take off is a washer and a collar. Set that aside. We'll go through this bearing hanger. The bearing hanger is what has your derailleur on. I'm going to move this. And this will give me enough room right here, about 3-4 inches, so I can take this 7-speed, or depending on what type of model you have, you could have a 42 speed or a old 36 speed, where you can take off the washers and this freewheel, and that will allow us to put on the motor components that we ship to you with your motor package. First thing we're going to put on is this 16-tooth solid sprocket, and the way it's going to go is with the gears facing towards the driver's side. I'm just going to slide this on. Then I'm going to add 2 metal washers, 2 3/4 shim washers that we send with you. I'm going to slide them on. It's going to go right up next to the solid sprocket. And then we have this L, I call it an L bracket, upside down L or backwards L, that has a bearing through it. The way this goes is with the bearing flange, which the flange just stops it from going all the way through. You can see that bearing comes through that metal plate. It's going to be like a check mark. So you'll slide it on. And then we're going to add one more washer and one more 3/4 collar. And that's the motor setup. That's why we had to pull out the axle so we could add this to it, so we can put the chain from the motor to the axle so it will drive the bike. Now I'm going to go in reverse and put my components back on. First I need a 3/4 collar. So on this middle part, or on a one-seater in the Go Boy series, you'll have two collars up against this the motor components that we send with you. You have one on the outside right beside the gear, and then one on the inside up against the bearing. That just holds that all, sandwiches it into place. A key is going to go into this 16-tooth sprocket. There's a keyway in it and the keyway on the axle. They will line up so it will actually drive the bike. Now I'm going to put the big bike cluster back on. I slide that on. The washers that you took off with the cluster, you put them back on. And then we're going to slide this back through. So it goes back through. Slide these components over so we can slide the axle all the way. Then I'm going to put another 3/4 collar. So now we just have one more washer right here, which is the 3/4 shim washer that we're going to put on. And then we're sliding it right back through. So we're going to push this wheel back. Make sure all these components will slide. If you slide all these components over, you won't have a hard time trying to get everything lined back up into place. And with leaving that wheel on the driver's side, it allows you to push the axle back up to where we set it here in the factory. So now that is exactly where it's supposed to go. So I still have the 3/4 nylon nut and the 4 washers. And now I'm going to go back and set all my components back to where they were and lock them down. Make sure you put the keyways back in your clusters. It's very important, or your bike will just spin. You won't get any traction anywhere. So now all my collars are back into place. My free wheels are back into place. I will go ahead and lock down these collars and the free wheel clusters. I will lock them down before we put the motor and transmission on itself, and I'll go ahead and put the other wheel on, and that will be it with the axle prep. So from the axle prep, we're going to move on to securing the motor and transmission to the vehicle. Alright, now we're going to put the motor on the back of the bike. We're going to start with the chain. I'm going to run it around the axle and attach the chain links to it. Right, the chain is on. Now we have these 2 U-bolts right here that come with the motor that run through the bottom of this plate right here and here. and you have 4 3/8 nylon nuts that attach these. Start out with the back. If you have 2 people, it'd probably be easier on you than 1 person to hold this up. I'm just going to get them on hand tight until I get all 4 of the nylon nuts on. Now I have 3 of the nuts on, and you can see that I've let my hand go from the motor so I can get around to this last U-bolt. Okay, now I have all 4 of the nuts on the U-bolt. Now I'm going to attach the motor stabilizer bar that comes from the axle onto the side of the motor itself. There's a hole right below the 16-tooth sprocket that drives the motor where we're going to attach that. And just like the 4 nylon nuts, I'm going to leave that loose until we get the chain lined up to where we want it. So I'm going to take the chain, I'm going to run it from the sprocket on the axle to the sprocket on the transmission. So I have everything loose. As you can see, the chain will hang a little bit. After I get it loose, I'm just looking for a line up. We send you enough spacers. We space off the motor already for you, and then the ones that you added onto the axle will space this sprocket out so the chain will line up, so you don't have any kind of popping with the chain being out of line. So now that I know that that's straight, I'm going to go ahead and lock down the collar here and the collar right here on the axle, and then lock down the special sprocket that's on the axle with the set screws that are provided. After I lock those down, I will tighten the nut that's on the motor stabilizer bar. It's right here. I will tighten it all the way down. At the same time that I'm tightening, I'll take my other hand and I will pull back on the motor to tighten that chain to where it's pretty much all the way tight, where you don't have any play in it. And then I will tighten my 2 U-bolts with a 9/64 or 9/16 wrench. And the 9/16 will also be used on the motor stabilizer nut. So I will start it. Use Loctite on all of our set screws. You can get Loctite at Lowe's, Ace, pretty much any hardware store. You can get you a small bottle for $2 or $3. It's good to have with a RHOADES car on pretty much any application, any nut, bolt. Just it gives it more hold, so if you have vibration from RHOADES, it will keep your nuts and your bolts and your screws in the proper place. So I've tightened down the two collars. Now I'm going back with the provided set screws for the special sprocket that's on the axle. Alright, now it is tight all the way, so I'm going to tighten down the motor stabilizer bar. At the same time I'm pulling back on the motor to give the chain tension. Alright, now it's tight, my chain's tight. Just has a little bit of play, about a 1/16, which is fine. Now I'm going to tighten down the back U-bolt first. Alright, the back U-bolts are tightened. Now I'm going to go up to the front U-bolts and tighten them. Alright, the front U-bolt is tightened. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to loosen the motor stabilizer bar about a half a turn and then tighten it right back down. That'll give a little play in the chain so it's not too tight, which could tear up the sprocket. And this will allow it to float but without coming off, where you still have enough tension to pull the motor good.